Radar. I'm sure a lot of you own radar. Operating a radar is not as much of a no-brainer as people like to think. It's true that we have a lot of automatic functions with it now, but understanding how radar works and what it's doing for you really helps you maintain safety on the boat. So the four main controls are your gain, tune, and C clutter, and IR. So the gain is how hard you're listening. A lot of people think that's how hard you're transmitting, but it's not. It's how sensitive you're listening, how weak of echoes you're listening for. That's what the gain control does. So if you turn the gain control maximum, you're listening for everything you possibly can, and you may very well pick up a bunch of noise by listening too hard. So listening a little less hard can help you declutter the screen. Tune is just as it implies. That is tuning to the frequency that you're working on. When a radar transmits, the magnetron, puts on a blast of energy. 2 gigahertz is very high frequency, and then it's packetized, so it lasts for a period of time. And that little packet of energy goes out and then is reflected back that you listened for. That packet of energy has a frequency, it's running at about 2.02 gigahertz or whatever, and that frequency does vary slightly as the radar ages. So tune is, you always tune the radar for a maximum return. So if you got a small blob on the screen and you start turning the tune knob and it gets bigger, then you're doing the right thing. As it starts getting smaller, you got to go back. You got to be at that peak. So you always tune for a peak, the most returns you can get. So then once you've gotten the radar tuned up, so you've got some picture there, you can declutter the picture using the C clutter control. The C clutter is used to take out the clutter caused by waves, and when you get reflections off the waves. And if you think about it, a 10-foot wave right next to your boat, well, it could block the radar signal completely, but a 10-foot wave way out there has very little effect. So because of that, the C clutter control has a great deal of effect very close to the boat and less of effect as you move away from the boat, and has no effect at all past 3 to 4 miles, depending on the unit, sometimes 6 miles. So C clutter is something you use to take away some of the clutter you see on a radar screen. And if you turn it too far, you just decluttered all the kayaks and canoes off your screen, or even all the power boats. If you turn it too far, you can lose targets. So you got to be really careful when you set that C clutter control. You don't go too far with it and think that you're safe when you're not. IR is an on-off function. You just turn it on or turn it off. It's called interference rejection, and that's for other radars operating in the area. It'll reject their signal so it doesn't clutter up your screen. How exactly they did that, I have no idea, but it does work quite well. So that's the basic operation to get a picture on the screen that's acceptable and usable. And then orienting it, and there's other things you can do with it, and one of the things you can do is orient it, because everyone is probably familiar, everyone that is familiar with radar is used to seeing what they call a head-up display. What's straight ahead of you is at 12 o'clock on the screen. That's called head-up mode. There's also north-up mode, where everyone's used to looking at a chart where Canada's at the top and Mexico's at the bottom. Canada's always up, north-up. So if you put the radar in north-up mode and you're going east, well, what's dead ahead of you is not going to be on the screen dead ahead of you. North is always dead ahead on the radar screen when it's in north-up mode. So you got to watch out that you don't think you're not going at that target, but you really are, because of the orientation mode that you put in. The other thing that you have to keep in mind with radar is that you are not stationary. Although you always stay in the center of the screen, in other words, the radar display, your boat's always in the middle of the screen, your boat is moving. So if you look at land and you're moving, it appears on the screen that land is moving because you're staying stationary on the screen. And that's called relative motion. And it's fairly easy to understand that if you're cruising north, land appears to be cruising south. But when you're cruising northwest and another boat is cruising southeast, the relative motion, the motion that those things are moving relative to each other, you and the other boat, becomes fairly complex. So a good way to interpret this is, if you're wondering if you're on a collision course, if that target has a constant bearing and a closing range, in other words, that target is getting closer and closer and closer to the center of the screen. It's running right down a radius. That is a collision course. Constant bearing, closing range, collision course. So that's something to always keep in mind. You do have the ability to off-center the radar so that instead of being in the center, your boat is at the bottom. That gives you more ability to look forward and when you're not wanting to look back. But radar is just what it is. You get these reflections, and the false echoes sometimes drive people nuts. There's two things that mainly cause false echoes: side lobes and skip. So the way you can recognize these, I'm not going to get too far into technically why it happens, but if you've got a large target and you're getting an echo off of it, you may get another echo and another echo and another echo straight in line with the first target. Those are called skip falses, and those kind of echoes are very difficult for the radar to remove with the clutter filters, but yet it's very easy for you to ignore them because you can see that they're, boom, 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 3 echoes in a line. You don't go, well, that's 3 boats. You go, I know that's a false echo because of the way it's characteristic. This also comes up to why you must practice with your radar, because you get used to seeing those false echoes, and then you don't get in a panic when you need the radar, you're in the fog, you're not sure where you are. That's the last time you want to be wondering, is that a false echo or not? You really want to be experienced with it.